dancer, traditional hand drummer, mother, daughter, and sister, and she's mixed ancestry, both Mohawk and Irish. Maggie spent her career working with Indigenous community members. She's the only Indigenous foster parent in Durham region and has fostered 57 children, oh my God, in 12 years. I only did 40. She's currently in the process of adopting one adult who is in her care. Maggie has worked in school settings, correctional facilities, both adults and with youth. She has worked as a housing worker, concurrent disorder case manager at the Native Child and Family Services in Toronto. She continued her work in the child and family well-being sector as part of the Children's Services team at the Native Child and Family Services of Toronto. Sorry, I'm not going to say this right. And then started to work at DBCFS on the alternative care team and moved into the role as a family services worker. She was the Indigenous resource educator for the City of Toronto Children's Service Division and a child welfare band rep for the Mississauga Escugok Island First Nation. Maggie worked as a senior and elder wellness coordinator, currently is the learning and development trainer at Native Child and Family Services of Toronto. She possesses a diploma in law and security, child and youth work, and a degree from the Ryerson University in partnership with the First Nations Technical Institute in Social Work, and she graduated with honors. She's a vetted trainer for the University Health Network and the Toronto Catholic District School Board on trauma-informed work with Indigenous children and families. Maggie will start off our opening ceremonies for today. I'd like to also introduce you to Dorothy Gibbs. Dorothy is a registered social worker, therapist, speaker, and founder of INA Counseling Services. Did I say that right? She has experiences working in various sectors, serving diverse communities in community setting, community healthcare settings, child welfare, family court clinic, and hospital settings. Dorothy believes in fostering a supportive space that welcomes vulnerability, self-compassion, authenticity to all individuals, and that healing and growth can be found through human connection. Absolutely. Dorothy's practice encompasses an intersectional, holistic, anti-oppressive, anti-racist, strength-based, art-based, evidence-based, and family-centered approach. She incorporates different approaches, including trauma-informed work, cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, attachment therapy, solution-focused therapy, and mindfulness in her practice. When Dorothy is not in session, she enjoys gardening, reading, listening to podcasts, and spending time with families. And as you hear from Dorothy and many of our other speakers, they'll talk to you from their lived experiences of these approaches that they've been using. Natasha is a therapist and a published author. Really? I didn't know this. She has worked supporting individuals with their mental health for over 20 years. She has spoken at mental health forums, addressing a variety of areas of mental health, including mental health in the Black community. Natasha believes that we all possess resilience. Natasha is dedicated to uncovering the resilience already there, to foster and build resilience where needed, and demonstrate how to grow through adversity. She's passionate about helping people move past fear into the life they desire and purpose to live. Thank you so much for being here, Natasha. And we will definitely purchase your book, okay? Chantel is a registered social worker and psychotherapist and the co-founder of Win Rose Oasis Services. Beautiful name. You have to tell us how you got the name. She is also the lead therapist for the Black Therapist Collective. Chantel is passionate about working with children, youth, and adults for providing professional therapeutic services and working from an anti-oppressive, anti-Black, and trauma-informed lens. Chantel's beliefs in the importance of community care aims to provide a space for each person she works alongside to be seen, to be heard, and supported on their journey. Thank you so much. And Jelani Adams is a founder and clinical director of Thrive CBT, a group counseling practice based out of Whitby. What? My first reading this. What? We're colleagues. Okay. She is a registered social worker I don't know why I thought it was Brampton. Now I'm thrown off my game. He is a registered social worker in Ontario and has been working as a psychotherapist for over 10 years. Jelani is a certified CBT therapist and a Canadian Association of Cognitive and Behavioral Therapies and the Academy of Cognitive and Behavioral Therapies in the United States. Jelani is the present board of directors with the CACBT, serving as a membership chair. It's amazing. Jelani's area of focus include depression, anxiety disorders, stress management, post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD. In addition to his duties with Thrive CBT, Jelani works as a consultant for Tela CBT Incorporated, which is an online platform that specializes in CBT. Along with providing psychotherapy for clients, Jelani has helped to develop and facilitate training and mentorship for family physicians, graduating students learning CBT. Jelani earned his master's in social work from the Wilfrid Laurier University. He completed his bachelor's in psychology at York University. He also holds a certificate in rehab services from York University and Seneca College. So our panels are stacked today. Thank you all for joining, and let's begin.
So that's me. I got it. All right, so I have my feather here, which is my eagle feather. I have a smudge going, and a smudge that I have today is just sage. And with this, we would usually smudge our eyes so that we can see, smudge our mouth so we speak kind words, smudge our ears so that we're listening, and then smudge our heart so it's open. I have some tobacco in my left hand. I'm just going to open up this gathering for you all today in a good way. Nyamagoa, I want to just say Sengwa Andiso, which is creator in Mohawk. My name is Maggie. My spirit name is Morning Songbird. I come from Tyndonega. I'm mixed with Irish roots, and I'm Turtle Clan. So I just want to say, this evening, I want to give thanks for the water that quenches our thirst, and that has been around all day long, filling up our lakes and our rivers. And I want to give thanks for the life sustainers, the green grasses, the fruits and berries, the medicines, the herbs, the animals, the four winds, the thunder beings, the full moon that we have every month that gives us renewal and a sense of connection, the stars, the sun, and the spirit protectors. So I'm going to put my tobacco into my smudge. And I'm just going to sing a nice little song for everybody this evening. Just maybe I'll sing a healing song since we're talking about mental health and how it impacts communities. And there is a bit of an intersection between Indigenous and the Black community. So when we drum a song, we would start off with 4 beats, and that's to honor the 4 directions. So some songs will have 4 rounds, or they'll have 7, again, honoring the directions. And that song, that was called Vocables, just to be clear, there was no actual words in that. And that song, those 4 beats you heard in between all of the beats were honor beats. So that's what we do sometimes, just to kind of honor what the song is about. So that one was a healing song and also a men's honor song. So your turn, Nicole. Take it away.
Thank you, Maggie. That was beautiful. Thank you so much. It's important for us to start off with the land acknowledgement. I have a typical land acknowledgement that I've borrowed. It isn't my own. And then going to end with an anti-Black racism statement. I'd like to acknowledge the land of the peoples of Mississauga, Scugog Island, First Nation. We are thankful to be welcomed on these lands in friendship. These lands we are situated on are covered under the Williams Tree and the traditional territory of Mississauga, a branch of the Greater Anishinaabe Nation, which includes Algonquin, Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi. These lands remain home to a number of Indigenous nations and people. And we acknowledge this land out of respect for the Indigenous nations who have cared for Turtle Island, also called North America, from before the arrival of peoples until this day. Most importantly, we remember the history of these lands have been tainted by poor treatment and a lack of friendship with the First Nations who call them home. This history is something we're all affected by, as we're all treaty people in Canada. We all have a shared history to reflect on, and each of us is affected by this history in different ways. Our past defines our present, but if we move forward as friends and allies, then it does not have to define our future. And as Maggie described, we do have an intersection of identities and experiences on this land. And it's important for us to acknowledge that. And even though my ancestors didn't come here willingly, they're still settlers here on this land. And it's important for us to acknowledge the importance of these lands. In our conversation today, it's important for us to acknowledge the impact of anti-Black racism, which has had a detrimental effect on the lives of Black Canadians. And we'll talk further today about what that means. Through systems, policies, and practices, Black people have been traditionally barred from participating fully within Canadian society and Canadian system. They've also been systemically excluded from Canadian history, positions of leadership, and access to mobility. So meaning that in history books, it isn't talked about or isn't shared information about Black history and Black experiences. And that's why we have Black History Month, to be able to celebrate those accomplishments of Black people. Because of systematic racism, it's led to higher rates of incarceration, higher involvement in the child welfare system, lower outcomes for education, and so much more. And we're getting the data in terms of what that looks like on a number scale. And it's pretty difficult to watch. We're here, many of us are here because we either want to know more, or we've had these experiences of Black mental health, and we want to be able to understand and know how to be able to support others. We also may come here because we want to just even talk about our own experiences and explore how that's impacted us in our lives. And so whatever reason that you're here for, I am glad that you are here. I invite you to this conversation that we're having today. And with hope that as we have this conversation, that we all can end off, I guess, in terms of our action and what we're going to do differently, or what's going to be different and what's going to change. As I shared with you, this is our second year of having these conversations. Our first conversation is found on YouTube if you're interested in watching. It was really good, and Natasha was here, and we had the opportunity to unpack some of the difficulties and concerns that was being addressed within our community. And so in March of 2021, if you remember, it was the height of the pandemic. There were some areas that were still under a stay-at-home order, and the situation looked really bleak for a lot of our community members. And we had raised concerns about, families experiencing grief, the lack of touch and connection with other people. And that was central into, what Dorothy shared in terms of the importance of us being able to connect and touch. And that was, taken away because of the pandemic. There was talk, we kind of explored the concerns around accessibility with the internet, computers, not being in safe homes. And we talked a bit about the impact of intimate partner violence and how that impacted the family system, as well as the intersections of anti-Black racism and how those systemic issues then further influence families. And we talked about a change. You know, young people, I think one of the slides shared that young people were the ones who were also reaching out for support, saying that they needed counseling or they needed someone to talk to. And what does that look like? So I wanted to kind of start off our conversation today and just really exploring. We're a year later from last year. We're starting to look like things are getting a little bit better, and that restrictions are changing, that people are able to gather more frequently. I even heard like mask mandates might be coming down or coming off soon. So I just wanted to kind of touch base with everyone, and whoever wants to answer first can feel free to go ahead to do so. But what would you say are some of the trends that we're noticing as we're shifting pandemic rules? What are some of the trends that you might be noticing with your clients, with Black mental health, things like that?
Some of the things that I'm experiencing within my clients particularly is I feel like there is experiences of like stress, anxiety, and uncertainty, right? So stress about what's next, what's going to happen with this new shift in the pandemic, right? Folks are worried about perhaps a new variant that might come up, right? Folks are they're also worried about, COVID-19 circulating again or coming back again in the years to come. So those are some of the things that are really coming up for me in sessions with clients.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I would also. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I've seen some of the same kind of concerns. As much as we have talked about wanting to go back to what we were calling normal, now that there's opportunity for it, we've been removed from it for so long, it's anxiety provoking to return. So I actually had a conversation with a client today in session where they opted out of school because they moved it to an in-person model. They were mentally prepared for online, but not mentally prepared for in-person, because the last time they were in person, people weren't following the protocols. And so they weren't sure that they could stay safe. So I know there's a lot of anxiety about what will it look like to start opening back up, and will that be safe? And on top of it, some people have quite adapted to working from home. So what will it look like to change my routines to be back in person, adding the commute that, may have been something they grew used to before, but may not want to return to having an hour commute each way? What does that mean for childcare? What does that mean when you are a Black person and have been spared some of the aggressions that you deal with in-person working, and you maybe not have dealt with on the same scale when you're working remotely? So these are some of the things that have come up in my practice, speaking with my clients.
Thanks, Natasha. You're speaking my language. I had an in-person event the other day, and the whole time I'm like, I don't want to do this. I like my regular life. So it's definitely going to be a shift. And you talked about something really important in terms of the microaggressions or the aggressive workplaces that some people were experiencing, and now having to like consider going back into that. Absolutely. The anxiety around that for sure. Chantal?
And I would also add that some people are actually excited to be back out. I have some clients already signed up for some classes to kind of get out there and be social with people again, because they really miss that. So that's something I definitely see happening as well.
That's a good point. Jelani?
I think one of the biggest things that I noticed was like pretty new, and people weren't expecting it, is like the family dynamics in terms of, okay, this person's vaccinated, this person isn't vaccinated. How do we navigate? And just people's comfort levels as well. Some people are comfortable still interacting with people. Some people, everything gets masked and everything's getting wiped down and all that kind of stuff. So the family dynamics have been pretty big. That's a big trend that I've noticed, just in terms of people trying to navigate it. And it's not necessarily about one side being right or one side being wrong. It's just about differences in how do we do that? Do we do Christmas dinner? Do we do a birthday party, knowing that someone might be vaccinated, someone might not be, or all that kind of stuff, or like what's safe, what isn't safe. So it's just been the family dynamics. That's been a big one, an added stress for people and how to navigate that stuff.
Yeah, wow. That's led to some conflicts, in families. I've had a
Absolutely.
couple stuff happen. I was just, yeah. Yeah. Something about Florida trip, and I was like, hey, why are you going to Florida? But yeah, it's happened.
I've also seen some friends no longer hanging out or friendships ending because of this discrepancy around the safety. So yeah, it's all happening.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. So I guess that kind of leads to our next question is this Black Mental Health Day was started in Toronto a couple years ago. And it's been a whole week of awareness. I had no idea until like a couple weeks ago. So, I mean, that's good because we need to create that space, and it shouldn't be in Black History Month or Black, shouldn't be in February. It's also about awareness, knowledge dissemination. So being able to talk about the knowledge. Why do you think, from even your own perspective, why is this so important for the Black community? And why should we focus on mental health? Why do we need to talk about this? And whoever wants to chime in first.
I think it's really important simply because I think in some respects in the Black community, we're steps behind when it comes to acknowledging mental health and the importance that it plays in people's lives and stuff like that. I know now there's certain culture, stuff like that, and like basically mainstream, it's like, okay, well, yeah, you go see a therapist and it's not a big deal. And in some respects in the Black community, for some people, it's like you hear that they see a therapist, you're crazy. Like, what's wrong with you? All that kind of stuff, right? So I feel like we're a few steps behind in that regard. So I think it's really about acknowledgement and giving people permission and letting people know that, hey, it's okay to talk about this stuff. And we're not sort of in the stages where it's like someone has a mental health issue, like family is just like, oh, their head's not good, and that's it. Well, it's not it, right? Mental health is really, really important. It's just as important as physical health. And I really think it's about giving people permission to know that it's okay to talk about this kind of stuff and that it's valuable and it's important.
Yeah, thank you so much for raising. Absolutely.
Yeah, and just to add to what Jelani is saying, right? And I think that I believe it's awareness is so important because it's like destigmatizing access to mental health within the Black community, right? It normalizes it. It makes it, I think that we need to normalize therapy a little bit more, like going to therapy and, taking medication, right? So the more conversations we have, the more normalization that we have, and because there's so much stigma around mental health within the Black community, just as Jelani is mentioning. So definitely the stigmatization of it, right? And I think that overall, I believe we have to take care of our mental health, just like Jelani says as well, as our physical health, right? Because when we have physical pain, we go to a doctor. So when we have any emotional or mental pain as well, we can see a therapist, and that's okay. And there's so many different forms of therapy as well. It's not just the one Eurocentric type of therapy where you sit in front of a therapist, right? And there is Afrocentric therapy, there's dance therapy, there is movement therapy, faith therapy, sisterhood therapy, right? There's so many forms of therapy. So I think just coming to that knowledge and realization that therapy is so vast, right? And it's not the one way of doing it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing. I started my therapy journey in a non-conventional way of providing therapy. So I get it. You're right. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. Chantal, do you want to add?
Sure. And I think it's great that we went from a day to a week. And I hope that this conversation can continue to happen because we do need to normalize, access to support. And it's great that I'm starting to see, especially during the pandemic, that a lot more people were reaching out, especially due to the isolation and feeling, needing that support. Obviously, continued work needs to be done, but I'm glad that this conversation is being had.
Thank you. Natasha, what are your thoughts?
One thing that excites me is just that I feel like there are more dialogues. And I think one of the things I've experienced is transitioning into full-time private practice. I now introduce myself as a therapist. And I didn't realize how much a dialogue would be created just out of saying that. People ask questions. And I think, one of the things that I acknowledge all the time when people are like, well, why, do we focus specifically on Black mental health? And I said, try living a life where every day in some way you're told you're less than. How would that not affect your mental health? So this is particularly why we need to focus on mental health within our community, because we are dehumanized and we are minimized in so many aspects of mainstream life. And it would have to take its toll. So I think it's really important that we start having these dialogues, because when we carry things in isolation, it's very hard to heal. And when we have these open dialogues and we decrease and hopefully remove stigma, especially by paying attention to the language that we use, I think then we have tremendous opportunity to heal.
Thank you. That's why I started with the videos. We had to, right? We had to talk about why we're here. Let's talk about the system. Let's talk about the impacts. Absolutely. So I guess that leads to my next question, just around grief and loss, because I know that the pandemic has definitely impacted our community. I have so many experiences personally about grief and loss. Just before the pandemic started, I think 2 years to this day, there was a traumatic event that occurred in my family. And my family lives everywhere. There's some people in Trinidad, there's some people in Maryland, and I have like one set of family in Canada. So when grief happens, people are supposed to get together, they're supposed to connect. We spend the first couple of days before the burial just meeting and eating together, telling stories. So because of the pandemic, that never happened. So that feeling of grief was never settled ever. I think we did a Zoom meeting a year later, but the Zoom meeting isn't replaced with me being able to hug my cousin's kids or to be part of that connecting piece that we weren't able to do. And I'm sure there's so many families, so many stories that we've heard about people who weren't able to experience that process of grief and weren't able to, fully connect or be able to resolve some of those feelings and experiences. So my question is, what have been your experiences that you've heard or talked about, and what are some strategies that you suggest around us healing and moving forward?
I would suggest first being creative. When we are faced with, some of the limitations of not necessarily being able to connect in person. One, we had, for people who lived alone, they had their household, connect with those you can, but we weren't necessarily connecting in the numbers. And like you mentioned, sometimes people are in different countries, maybe using online platforms, and looking at, what are the ways can we communicate togetherness, concern, care. I actually had a friend who lost 4 people in a month at the turn of 2020 into 2021. And I was like, well, I can't see you. So I literally bought a teddy bear, called it a hug bear, and sent it in the mail. I said, this is the only way I can hug you right now. And I just started thinking about what could I do? So I think I've never spent so much money in greeting cards, because I just started sending people random greeting cards going, this is how we're going to connect. This is how we're going to touch base. Another way we can. But I tried to challenge myself to be creative in creating and fostering connection, because the ways that I was used to didn't necessarily do it. But what I learned was there's many ways to feed your soul. And so I think the more creative we can be, the more we can close that gap until we can do the things that we typically do.
Yes, and I want to add that in terms of grief is not just around death. It could be, a breakup, a loss of a job. And that happened a lot during the pandemic where people lost that financial security and they had to grieve that, now having to deal with how to care for and provide for their family. So those added more stresses onto people. So for sure, it was important to make sure we, provide that support. And also, as mentioned by Natasha, being creative, had a lot of Zoom funerals and meetings throughout this pandemic. Wasn't able to visit some family members who were dealing with cancer, so that you can see how that could be very isolating, being in the hospital and not having visitors or someone to come and hug you, but just had to do a lot of virtual things to just continue that connection as much as possible.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing. I think that's key. Kind of fitting into what we've been talking about, grief and loss, and also a question came up around Black youth and encouraging them to access resources. And I feel that there's some connection between the two. So I thought it'd be good to bring it up as well. So the person writes, knowing that there is so much stigma for Black youth and adults to access professional services such as therapy, are there any non-professional routes that you would recommend for folks to pursue? We're thinking about, as we talked about, grief and loss, separations, difficulties that have happened because of the pandemic and even just before, the intergenerational experiences. What are some suggestions that you may have? Maybe I'll go to Jelani to take this one.
So just seeking a little bit of clarity on the question. So non-professional routes to get the assistance or help that people need?
Yeah, I believe so, yeah.
I think one of the biggest things that can be really helpful for people is just being open and honest. I encourage people to be open and honest with those around them, those that they trust. Yes, if you're going to see a mental health professional, then that's good. If that's something that you feel that you need, but may not necessarily be what you need. Maybe you need a closer relationship with your parents and just sort of opening up and telling them, or talking to a sibling, or being honest with friends, or what have you, right? Just relying on those people who are close to you, and not just sort of surface stuff where it's like, well, yeah, I'm okay, everything's fine, right? So it requires an element of vulnerability and making yourself a little bit vulnerable, just so you can connect with people and deepen those relationships. So that's what I encourage people to do, like connect with people who are supportive in their lives and open up a bit more in that way.
Thank you for sharing. Dorothy, what are your thoughts? Grief and loss, accessing resources, yeah,
definitely. I would like to add too, I think when we're talking about the cultural piece and we talk about grief and loss and during the pandemic, the thought that's coming to mind is like, how can we reclaim our culture back, or how can we reclaim or gain, I guess, how can we care for ourselves in the sense that is it possible to maybe connect with our ancestors? What does that look like, right? Does it mean perhaps even listening to traditional music or listening to music that really sings to our soul, right? In terms of coping with that pain of grief and loss, would it help to perhaps even, engage and eat with cultural meals and cultural foods as well, right? And when we're talking about grief and loss as well, another thought that comes to mind is how can I honor the person that I've lost? Or how can I honor the experiences that I've lost? What does that look like? How can I engage in that memory in a way that is really helpful, that is really fruitful to me, right? And the folks that perhaps I've lost through grief. Yeah.
Thank you. Dorothy's doing a 6-week grief and loss group with us too, in April, right?
Yes.
So very timely and such a really important conversation. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
The next kind of topic I wanted to bring up was suicide, and I guess addiction is another topic as well. So we're just going to start with that because I want to lay it on the table. And I think it's definitely something that we need to spend a session on, because we can't do a conversation around suicide in the Black community. I just wanted to hear from you. What are your thoughts about suicide in our community? What are some strategies and suggestions? And I guess we see a lot of stuff like on the media. So we all saw Regina King and her son, and we witnessed that, right? And then there was another, and my apologies, I can't remember her name right now. I'm not good at names. A model, I believe, as well. Yes, okay. So it happens in our community, like we see it broadly, but it also happens within our families and our experiences. So what are your thoughts about suicide? And yeah, what are some strategies and suggestions?
Yeah. I think it's so important for us to recognize when our loved ones, recognizing the emotions and feelings of our loved ones, right? When we notice that someone is low mood or someone isn't in their on their baseline, for example, right? How can we reach out to them? It's okay to reach out for support, right? And when we're not doing okay, how can we also seek out the support that we need, right? And I think that's why these conversations are so important in terms of talking about mental health, mental wellness, right? When we're not okay, it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to cry. It's okay to reach out for support, right? And then in terms of treatments, usually with folks who are experiencing suicidal ideation, usually what I do is complete a safety plan with them. So what that means is creating a plan, identifying some of the support systems that they have, right? Who can I reach out to when I have these thoughts? What can I do to ground myself? What can I do to support myself in this moment when I have intrusive thoughts, when I have suicidal ideation? Connecting with folks as to crisis lines that they can reach out to as well, and using dialectical behavioral therapy as well, right? But I think the most important thing is connecting with supports, right? Connecting with support systems. It's so necessary.
Yeah, I'd agree with Dorothy as well. Just in terms of connecting with resources, safety planning, that stuff's really, really important. Also connecting individuals with their GPs. If it's maybe needing to start on an antidepressant, if it's needing a psychiatric assessment, whatever, psychiatric assessment for any sort of diagnostic type stuff, or medication recommendations. It's connecting them with the supports, connecting them with their GP, safety planning. Those are the biggest things that I focus on when someone expresses suicidal ideation and has active intent to potentially harm themselves.
And I also would add, it's important to be aware of, the personalities change in people, knowing the warning signs, seeing when, they're very happy and go lucky to very sad for long periods of time, checking in, asking are you wanting to harm yourself? Being very upfront with, how they might be feeling, and even asking these questions might assist a youth in actually saying it out loud or actually naming their experiences, and being okay with seeking professional help, that you're not alone in this. A lot of people are experiencing these feelings, but it's important, especially during this time, to have community support. If it's even you're not comfortable with your parents, is there church family or outside friends or people you can access that might be helpful to talk about these things with?
Thank you. Thanks so much for sharing and highlighting, and pretty much similar to the video that was shared before that I'll share with everybody else, that kind of talks about sometimes you don't even know, right? Like they can appear as though things are okay, and then, they're really struggling with other things that are going on. Really good question in the chat. I think it'll be a good time to ask this question. And Natasha, I don't know if you're able to kind of start us in this conversation, but the question was, the Black community doesn't feel like we have protection when we choose to help our family members that suffer from mental health, especially at the hands of the police. How can we go about asking police services for help without the fear of our family members getting killed? And speaking from my own experience as a foster parent, and have had on multiple occasions had to call the police in for support or in for guidance. It's definitely a fear of mine as well. And yeah, definitely something that we need to talk about or discuss. I'll start with Natasha. Does that work for you?
Yeah, that's really great for me because I used to work as a crisis worker in a hospital. So
yes,
I've been on the side of when they're brought to the hospital with family or by police. And this is a dialogue I've had with many people that it looks different in our community because adding police to somebody who may not be themselves can be a very scary equation. I would suggest first and foremost checking when you're calling, do you have a mobile crisis service? So in the city of Toronto, but now in other jurisdictions, they have teams that are either a mental health nurse and hopefully a trained officer, or maybe a social worker and an officer. So ideally, if you feel that you need to have this type of intervention and they offer it, please request the mobile crisis, because then you're getting a mental health professional who is going to be able to recognize the symptoms of mental health and hopefully have better capability of interacting with somebody who might be in a dysregulated state, agitated, what have you, depending on what their presentation is, because their ultimate goal should be safety, right? And we know that regular police are trained to approach safety differently than mental health professionals are. So ideally, you want to have somebody with that mental health experience involved. If you have the time, the resources, if you have somebody in your community, your tribe, who you can call to be present before you even get the police there, they might be able to help create some dialogue that might work better. So trying to, unfortunately, we shouldn't have to, in the midst of crisis, think about how to mitigate what we can do to spare ourselves from racism, but this is our reality. I remember having a dialogue with a colleague who was a white woman who was saying, well, if your son's agitated, call the police. And I said, why would you tell a Black woman that? I said, it's not that simple. So let me tell you why. And I had to break it down for her. It doesn't mean we never do it. We just might have some other things sometimes that we want to take into consideration. When necessary, we still have to do that. But I think it's very important that we ask questions like, if you're calling the police, do you have a mobile crisis service? Do you have somebody who is trained to deal with somebody with a mental health issue, especially if you have somebody who may be lacking insight because they're off medication, if they're dealing with certain kind of mental health disorders. And ideally, you want people to come in who know not to come in confrontational.
Absolutely.
Right? And that's, I think, where things escalate is when the approach is, I'm going to overpower you rather than approach you understanding that you are suffering. And so I'm going to see you from a position of you're struggling with something and I'm here to help, versus I'm going to overpower you to take you to the people who can help. So I think sometimes just in the information they get first, it can change drastically what the approach is. And it's unfortunate that family members may have to take this stuff into consideration, even in trying to access the services, but it is part of the reality that we deal with. But certainly asking for that. If you have a family member who you feel needs a crisis assessment and will willingly go with you to the hospital, then you do not need to involve the police. And you can go to emergency departments and ask for a crisis assessment. And most of them across the GTA, most of the larger hospitals will offer that, where you have the opportunity to dialogue. And it doesn't mean that they have to stay in hospital, right? You're more asking for the assessment to see what interventions can be suggested or put in place in order to really hopefully prevent from admitting them to hospital. But these are some of the options. I know from working on the other side, some of the stuff that can come up, and it can be very scary, especially when, because we have such stigmatizing language that everybody experiences, not just within our community. Sometimes we don't even have the language to bring to the professionals to be able to help them understand what's going on. But you want to be able to, as best as you can, engage in dialogue. Ask if you're going for a crisis assessment, if you're calling the police, what have you, ask if you can have maybe a moment to explain what you've witnessed. That way, if somebody's not able to explain their experience, there's not a lot of assumption being made out of a very little bit of presentation. You want to be able to show what you understand is the signs of decompensation of mental illness, the signs of mental illness, what have you, and hopefully that will be part of what's included in the assessment process.
That's a really good point. Thank you so much. Hopefully our tech person can write some of those notes, so making sure that you're also documenting the behaviors, the symptoms as well. Thank you. And thanks again in the chat, they shared the one I was speaking about as well. I appreciate that. Thank you. Jelani, do you want to add to our conversation, please?
Yeah, I think I'm really glad that Natasha could bring that experience in terms of being working in the crisis unit in a hospital. So she could bring that expertise to the table. I'm really glad that she was able to do that. I think the big thing that stood out to me was just the detail. It's different. It's unfortunate that we would need additional detail, but that can be the difference for some people. If you're talking about, okay, someone's just having a mental health crisis and then hanging up the phone, and that's it. Those police, if it's not a mobile crisis unit, are going to respond to it a little bit differently than this is my son, or this is a family member, or what have you. And okay, they're having a mental health episode right now. They deal with schizophrenia, or they deal with bipolar disorder, and this is what their symptoms look like. And this is what they won't respond to well, or this is what they will respond to well. And this is the way that you could approach it. So providing as much detail as possible can help in terms of how people are approaching the situation. And the approach in the situation is very significant. I'll actually share a story with everybody in terms of, like, I know what the mobile crisis unit looks like. I worked for an outpatient mental health program, and I know what it looks like when an officer and a social worker, or an officer and a nurse show up to a mental health call, and the legwork that's done by the mental health professional to prep the police and stuff like that. And it's putting some things in place, even if it's like, all right, well, you know what? You're going to respond and you're going to see me first, as opposed to seeing the police officers, or it can change the number of police that show up and that kind of stuff. And all of that stuff is really significant. I know for myself, what year is it? 2022. 7 years ago, I showed up at a hotel to check it out, and I was going to be staying there for a period of time. And I was just coming from work. So I didn't have bags with me or anything like that. I was just like, yeah, I want to check this out. I had no idea what was going on at the time. Apparently someone was in mental health crisis, and police were looking for them. And I actually fit the description, and they showed me a picture later on, and I could see someone similar build to me, that kind of stuff, as to why the hotel worker made the call that they made. So basically I was just waiting around. They went in the back and waited. They made the call to the police. And again, mental health mobile response team, social worker or nurse is going to show up along with the police officer. That team wasn't there. So it was 6 officers who showed up, and they're looking at me and they're like, well, do you have ID? And I'm like, what's the issue? So they asked me for my ID. I gave them my ID. And then they're like, oh, it's not the person that we're looking for. And then they left, basically. And I was like, what is going on? Thankfully, one of the officers, I was like, excuse me, what's going on? And he told me, he's like, you have no idea what's going on. And then he had shared with me, we're looking for someone. He showed me the picture of the person because I fit the description, and I did fit the description of the person that they were looking for, who was MIA. And after that, and they explained it to me, and then they had left. But I think about that situation. And if I'm someone who's going through a mental health crisis and I'm approached by 6 officers, and they're just asking me for my ID, they're not explaining who they are, they're not telling me why they're there or anything like that, my reaction could have been a lot different if I was someone who wasn't in a place where I was mentally stable, and the outcome could have been quite different. Had I have tried to run, or had I have been try to be confrontational or super scared or all that kind of stuff, right? So that definitely changes things in terms of like mobile crisis teams and having the knowledge and having the experience to deal with people with mental health. Because yeah, not all mental health calls, you're not going to get officers who have the training, and they might approach it in a different way. So Natasha, thank you for sharing about the mobile crisis team.
Well, thanks for sharing your experiences. That would have, I would have had a hard time with that for sure. And imagine having, depression or anxiety or other challenges. And they talked in the chat too, as you were chatting, just about, people who experience depression or experience anxiety. And, the term was used around high functioning, right? That sometimes you're not going to be able to notice how people are feeling. And that's why it's important to, as we were saying before, it's important to check on our friends, check on our strong friends, check on, the people that we may not be connected with, because, sometimes they're going through things that we may not know about, right? Maybe that also leads to us creating some safe spaces. Before we switch to kind of just the intersectionality, because I want to spend some time talking about, how anti-Black racism fits into some of the narratives about our identities. Does anyone else have anything else to share about this topic, mental health, in terms of in the broader spectrum? Grief, loss, what they've noticed.
Well, to add, I think it'll be important for people to, try to understand what their coping strategies might be in the moment that they can use till they get further support. So thinking of if you need to call someone or reach out to a crisis line or going outside for a walk, something that might be helpful to cope for the moment until someone or the mobile crisis team comes along.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you for sharing. So we're not really switching gears. I do want to, this I guess is part of everything that we're talking about, but one of our staff had come up with this question. I thought it was really good. So we've often talked about the impact of anti-Black racism and what does that look like in terms of our narratives about ourselves. And one of the narratives are about Black men and Black community and even Black mental health as well. It's important for us to discuss and really dismantle those narratives about Black individuals. What does Blackness mean? What is Black identity? Over the past couple of weeks, I saw this film called Profiled: The Black Man. I'm going to just show the trailer just to get people to start thinking about it. And then our first kind of question to the panelists is, when it comes to the narratives of Black men, anti-Black racism, mental health, what are your thoughts? What are some of the experiences that you may see within your practice, within the individuals that you are working with? And the clip is like 2 minutes long. It's not very long.
Black men are beautiful.
Black men are magnificent.
Black men are innovators.
Black men are brilliant.
Compassionate.
Intelligent.
Complex.
Resilient.
Critical.
Necessary.
Warriors.
Everything.
Cosmic, supernatural, cool.
I've always felt the perception of who we are is filtered through a lens of fear.
Still to this day, Black men are not able to just walk down the street without someone assuming that they don't belong there.
Stereotypes that have been put on Black men takes place in the newspaper headlines, it takes place on the television, and I think it's played a major role in the bias against Black men. It's an atomic bomb.
It's every day for us. Every single day.
Put your hands out the window!
That's the narrative. I felt threatened. I felt afraid. If they got on handcuffs, they're still a threat because they're a Black man.
Black men are not a threat.
Black men portrayed as dangerous has been inside of the fabric of American culture from the beginning.
young black boys in America, we don't get a chance to be kids for a long time. There's no room to emote with the exceptions of anger.
Society would have you think that we don't love and really rock with our queens like that, and we do.
Most black fathers are in the home. Well over 50% is a shocker to many people.
We are all living through a very painful time, and we must be able to talk about that.
If you have Discovery, I encourage you to see it. And even though it's American, it's also very true today. Who wants to start our conversation? So when it comes to narratives about Black men, anti-Black racism and mental health, what are your thoughts and experiences? What do you see within counseling? And I'm also looking to hear the audience thoughts and feelings about the video that we played as well.
I have a youth client who's actually struggling with, dealing with racism. He lives in a very white, small city, and constantly being bombarded by teachers, being questioned all the time. And that's been a lot of the focus of our sessions around dealing with that racism, and which has led him to actually overdose at a point. But thank God that he's doing all right now. But these conversations are still coming up, and feeling like he's being judged. And also he's adopted within a white family. So that also is an added layer of, while he's within a white space, he's also not believed for the same things or looked at the same. So, and also he takes on this wanting to, have no emotions, and constantly have to be like, let's talk about the feelings that you're having. But it's kind of like you have to really drag it out of him to at least acknowledge the feelings that he's having. So I think those are also some things that, Black men are dealing with in terms of not being able to express their emotions, or having that stigma to around that, and having to be hard or strong all the time, which ends up being very damaging in the long term.
Thank you, Chantal. You're so right. You're so right. Dorothy, you're off mute, so I know you want to talk. She's still there? Did she freeze?
Well, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I think she's frozen. Okay. Oh no, there you are.
I hope you can hear me fine. Yes, so definitely. Can you hear me?
You cut out again. Try again.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that, folks. And I think when we're talking about, anti-Black racism and, mental health within masculinity as well, I think the mere fact that, you're Black and you're a man, as we all know, you are, you are targeted, right? So the mere fact that you're men, can you just imagine if you're tall, right? And what does that look like? And what does that, what are some of those visualization and expectations in society, right? And how violent that can be to a Black man. And I'm also thinking it starts early, right? And usually if we're thinking about children when they're in school, right? Our children, let's say, for example, if they express themselves in a way that is culturally acceptable, or in a way that it may be viewed as maybe perhaps problematic or unacceptable, right? And oftentimes they are diagnosed with maybe behavioral challenges or ADHD or some form of mental health disorder. And I think as we talk about anti-Black racism and mental health, particularly around Black men, I think it's also important for us to talk about, sanism. I know I talk a lot about sanism, which is actually sanism and anti-Black sanism. And these two terms were actually the research that was done in Ryerson University. So I'll actually even kind of give some, background information on that and how it's impacting the Black community and how it's more so impacting especially particularly Black men, right? Cynism is oppression, right, that normalizes discrimination, rejection, silencing, and exclusion of people. Right, it's a form of violence that makes it possible for psychiatrists to kind of diagnose, right, or medicate Black folks or young Black men, right? And young Black men are mostly diagnosed with schizophrenia more than any other group, right? Based on the research, Black children are being psychiatrized in a higher rates, right? And more Black identified patients are being held against their will at hospitals, right? And what does that say about the disparities, right, within the disparities and this, I guess, the disproportionality of Black bodies in mental health institutions? What does that mean for us, right? And then when we're talking about anti-Black cynicism now, right? Anti-Black cynicism is a form of cynicism that actually allows Black African bodies with mental health challenges to be silenced, to be shot, to be overdiagnosed, to be misdiagnosed, to be incarcerated, and to be incarcerated, I should say. And then if we're also even looking at historically too, right, when we're going through, through slavery time or enslavement, right, and how, Black folks have been diagnosed with mental illness, since that time. So for example, like slaves who were trying to run away from their masters were diagnosed with drapetomania, right? So again, how does that impact us? And how does that, again, I know we're going to be talking about intergenerational trauma in, coming up, but how does that trauma transfer down to each and every one, of our generation, right? In terms of the hypervigilance as well as Black people. And, the fact that the moment we step out of our home, we're anxious, we're hyper vigilant, right? Because we're not sure about our safety, right? So I think that, and when we're thinking about mental health as well, and within the Black community, where are some of those stigma also coming from, right? In terms of not seeing, not going to see a therapist and not speaking about mental health illness. All of these are all intertwined and intersected within, Black mental health, anti-Black cynicism, right? And anti-Black racism. Right. So, and I think that when we're talking about Black masculinity and mental health, I believe that it also not only does it, it's, historically, but also like when we're talking about how we're socialized as children through gender roles, identities, and our social identities and our attachments with our caregivers. What does that look like, right? In terms of even seeking help, in terms of our access to mental health, right? It's important to also note that, because I guess what I'm trying to say too is that fundamentally, when we're raised, oftentimes when we're raised, we teach our boys to be soldiers, and not necessarily how to become maybe the best soulmates. Right? We teach them to be strong and don't cry and be independent. Even in early stages of development, right? We tend to say that boys are more physical and they're active, and then oftentimes we say girls talk earlier than boys. However, when we're talking about language and expression and expressing our feelings, girls often ask about their emotions and feelings, and boys are not asked about their emotions as much, right? So they don't really have that language to express their emotions oftentimes or their feelings. So there's an emotional imbalance there as well, which can be very difficult for those that identify as men or boys to really express their emotions. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciated that. And I think in the chat as well, people share their own experiences and their own challenges, even with their own children, right? And it starts from very young, like you shared, like that socialization piece, that the gender roles are well defined. And then our Black boys have that added layer of anti-Black racism. I remember when my nephew was starting school, I was having nightmares like 2 weeks before. This is a 4-year-old entering into junior kindergarten, having these nightmares about, oh my God, like what's his experience going to be like? What's going to happen to him? And I'm not even going to kid you, within 1 month, an incident happened. And there's been multiple incidents. This kid's not even in grade 1 yet. Not even in grade 1 yet. And the way that he's stacked with his parents having the ability to advocate for him. Imagine you're a parent who doesn't have the ability to advocate for your children. Right? Yeah. Jelani, what did you want to share?
Well, I mean, we only have an hour left. This could be a 3, 4, 5, 6, 7-hour conversation. So I'll be sort of brief talking about it. I think when it comes to dealing with Black men and how they're going to be seen in society, that kind of stuff, obviously I have lived experience with that, so I know what that's about. And I think one of the biggest things that was most helpful for me on a personal level, and it's something that I try to do with clients and that kind of stuff as well, is I think my parents did a very good job in terms of making it very crystal clear in terms of me knowing exactly who I am, and really stress that to my brothers and I. So they told us exactly who we were. Society didn't tell us who we were. So that was a really important message for me. So I never really wondered about who I was or what have you, because my parents instilled in us exactly who we were, and what our names meant, and sort of how we should carry ourselves and how we should conduct ourselves. So I never had to look outside for that. But on the flip side, they also told me how society would see me and how I would be treated as such. So I knew who I was, but I also knew how I would be perceived. So I think they did a good job sort of telling us both sides of the story. When it comes to like dealing with, again, masculinity, again, Black men dealing with how society treats them, that kind of stuff. One of the things that, like I said, I try to focus on is, okay, I know how society sees you, and I know how society is going to treat you as such. And if there's legitimate concerns, whether it's workplace stuff or what have you, then Dorothy mentioned safety planning early on, right? Sometimes it's the role of, okay, well, how can you cover yourself? How can you protect yourself? Some of that stuff is needed. But then also when it comes to talking about who you are as an individual, like, yes, I know that people might say like, men aren't supposed to cry, or men aren't supposed to talk about their emotions or that kind of stuff, but it's just leaving space. Well, will you talk about it? Are you okay talking about it? Tell me what that's like for you, and just giving space for people to open up. And I also think that just given my position, and sort of, again, visibly being a Black male, right? It's like, it's almost like permission, where it's like, really, it's okay to come to therapy and talk about this kind of stuff. It's like, yeah, it's what I'm here for, right? So I think that those are some of the things that I focus on. Again, there's society's expectations, society stereotypes, and how society is going to treat you. But then there's also like, tell me who you are as an individual, and tell me what's going on with you, and leaving space for them to be themselves, as opposed to what they're told that they should be or shouldn't be, and all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else want to share their thoughts, their understandings, or issues?
If I can just add, I think one of the things we got to keep in mind when we look at mental health in the Black community with men is that the people writing the books and defining the disorders don't look like us. And so what happens is we have to continually remember, this is why I love what Jelani said about his parents helping him understand who he is, because you can't define me when you don't know me. And so we have to have awareness of self. And I think what it does is the deficits teach us about what we can take control over. What we have the option to do is then work towards giving our children a strong sense of self and understanding who we are. I'll give you guys an experience I had at work, and it made me laugh, because this was, to me, how culture and spirituality intertwine. So my very first week, or like first few weeks in my first full-time hospital job, they were discussing a Black male, and they said, and he believes that God talks to him. And that was part of his psychosis. And I put up my hand and I said, so are you guys going to diagnose me? Because I've been going to church my whole life, and I don't know what religion they don't believe their creator speaks to them. So I might have a specific religion, but I don't know which religion doesn't incorporate hearing from their higher above. So you cannot pathologize spirituality. And so this is part of what happens when we come from a very Eurocentric lens of creating disorders and defining them, is that what's not maybe the practice of one becomes a disorder and then defines the rest, who see things culturally and spiritually different. And so we have to be able to remember, we don't have to be boxed in by the parameters set by somebody who doesn't have our experience. And it's very challenging for people to encounter the system when some of these discrepancies exist, but we have to remember who we are so that we can help navigate our treatment in order to say, you can't say that this is part of a psychosis, this is part of my spirituality. You can't say, like, we had another situation where it was a young Asian male, and something that was a superstition in his culture was being seen as part of his bipolar disorder. And it was only when we had a nurse who was of the same culture, she was able to explain the superstition. And so, you know, we've got to be really careful that just because we don't know doesn't mean it means it's illness. And I think this is what happens to Black males, especially because, like the video said, if you're looked at first from a point of fear, it's so easy to pathologize. We have to be really cautious about that.
Absolutely, absolutely. APA, which many psychiatrists use to guide their diagnosis, nothing on intergenerational trauma, nothing on race trauma, nothing on anti-Black racism, and all of those things impact mental health. And like you said, like, our stories haven't been written, we haven't been documented, no research done, right? So that just means that the information about who we are and our identity isn't included in your treatment methods or your interventions or even in your diagnosis. Thank you for sharing. Great points, great points. Lots of people are sharing in the chat. Please continue to share your thoughts. I'm not switching topics. I'm just going to add on an extra layer of Black women, and found this, again, video, because I love videos apparently, that highlights a little bit, not even everything that I wanted to talk about in terms of Black women.
Who's been to therapy before? Who's been to therapy but actually hid it from your friends and family? Let me hear from you.
So we lost our son. He was stillborn, and I was raised to be strong, and what happens in my house stays in my house. And there was just no examples of women going to therapy, so I felt like I had to be able to hide it and manage it myself without really letting other people know that maybe I was weak, or maybe needed help, or maybe didn't pray enough. So.
What made you finally break through that, though? What made you finally say, even though there may be lots of things telling me don't try it, I'm gonna go ahead and try it?
Well, the hospital actually suggested I go to therapy. And first I was like, no, I got it, I'm good. But then I realized I wasn't good and that I needed help and I needed to talk to somebody who could understand. And that was kind of the problem as well with having a stillborn. I didn't know anyone else that had suffered from that. So who do you share and talk to when no one has said, hey, this happened to me? So what do you do? So I was like, okay, let me go find somebody. And I found a group outside of my community where I wouldn't know anyone to get help and try to find support.
Interesting. Thank you. Thank you. Brittany, talk about that a little bit, because I hear from a lot of people that being a strong Black woman actually can be the cause of your struggle.
Yeah, because it's a lie. yes, Black women are strong, but the demand that we be strong in the face of that kind of tragedy is a completely inhumane demand. And we deserve better than that. And if it is true that we teach people how to treat us, then sometimes you gotta be a little vulnerable and say, I actually don't have it all together. Actually, I'm a mess. And then what you find out when you say that is that a whole lot of sisters were struggling too.
Nicole, what do you hear when you hear that? Have you had any version of that experience?
I love therapy. I don't think it makes you weak to ask for help. I think, if anything, it means you are strong. I need somebody with a perspective far from my friends, someone who doesn't have actual stakes in my life, who cares about me, who can listen to me every week and go, girl, you are okay, and you will get to be better than you were, but talking about it helps. I'm a pretty vain person, and I love to talk about myself. I think I'm beautiful. Like, I'm very interesting. I love it.
Yes, sis. Yes.
But, like, your friends can only hear so much about your problems. So I go to this nice white lady named Mary, and she helps me so much.
Wait, hold on a second, because I hear from a lot of people that therapy is for rich white people. And two, I heard people say that if I'm gonna go to therapy, it needs to be a Black therapist.
Sure, I get that. I get that you want to speak to someone who has your experience, but no experience is truly that different. Like, there's no reason to suffer. There's so many ways to get help.
Pain is overrated.
Yes.
It truly is. It's over. And look, I'm sorry.
No, it's overrated and it's real.
Right.
We have a responsibility to take care of ourselves by learning who we are. Our society has not given us those tools up until now.
I promise that's my last video. What are your thoughts about the strong Black woman? What are some themes or issues that you have encountered when working with Black women?
Yeah, that's a really good one, right? I have clients, sharing with me that they've experienced that, and it's hard for them to reach out to their friends or their family because they've always been that strong person to always support their families and their friends, right? So it's really hard for them to seek help because, again, they don't want to seem weak or, they don't want to seem weak. But I think it's definitely a prominent stereotype that I see within practice. I think, although I think that, sorry, just give me a second here. because like showing emotion is a weakness, or asking for help is a weakness within the Black, Black women. I think that, just like the video said, is a lie, right? It's not a weakness. It's okay. We can ask for help. We can, reach out to our community, to our churches, or to our friends, right? Or any religious faith that we believe in, right? Although there is nothing wrong too with being strong and resilient, I think that we need to hold ourselves in a standard that sorry, I'm getting my words all mixed up here, but I think that it can be really exhausting if we continue to hold ourselves up to those standards of being strong and resilient, right? Yes, society is telling us that we're strong, right? But it's okay, right? When I think too, it's also in connection to like trauma that we've experienced, right? It's in connection to intergenerational trauma, racial trauma, right? And it could be also like a survival mode for a lot of Black folks who are experiencing mental health and feeling like, you know what, I need to protect myself right now, because if I don't protect myself, how am I going to survive? How am I going to care for my kids? How am I going to care for my home, right? So for a lot of Black women, as a means of survival, we don't ask for help, right? Because again, asking for help seems like a weakness. And also too, maybe in the past, we may have asked for help, right? So for a lot of folks, like if we're talking about trauma as well, maybe we were asked for help in the past and we didn't get the help that we needed, or we were treated perhaps very poorly. Maybe we were rejected, maybe we were ignored, maybe we were dehumanized for asking help. Right? So as a form of survival, again, we have to be strong for ourselves because we don't want to experience that re-traumatization again, right? So not only does that happen, that we start to internalize it as well, internalize this idea that we must be strong, right? But now, not only that, in the video as well, the system is telling us that it is, therapy is not for us, right? It's for rich white people, right? Therapy, and that we have to continue. It's almost like a wrestle. It's almost like a fight or a dance. And we'll continue to move between, right? What does therapy look like for us? What does therapy feel like for us? We have to really come to that understanding as well. Yeah, so I'll stop there for now. And if any thought comes to mind, I'll definitely jump back in.
Thanks, Dorothy. Lots of key points. Yeah. Chantal, what are your thoughts? Oh, sorry, Natasha and then Chantal. What's that?
Okay. Yeah. Even when we were talking about men, I was thinking about this word strong, and somehow we've transitioned to thinking strong means motionless. And I think we need to pay attention to how we're defining strong, how we define resilient, because what we do is it's like we're creating a nation of robots and not allowing people to feel what they need to feel. And I think one thing I see a lot in my practice with my clients is their response to pain is to try to ignore it, and that helps them feel strong. But I'm like, pain communicates something to us. So we have to listen to the pain, acknowledge that we have pain, listen to the pain so that we actually have a better idea of how to approach it and deal with it. And so I think part of our changing this is looking at what we even think strength, resilience, and all these things are, because I think it takes tremendous strength to admit I'm struggling. I think it takes tremendous strength to say I'm not okay, knowing that you may not even get the response that you're hoping for. But what's so beautiful, and it was even like highlighted a bit in the video, is when one person's honest and authentic, it opens the door to allow more people to say, yeah, I'm struggling too. It's just who's going to be that brave first person. And I'll just give you one last thought. Like, it's just a comical way that I try to encourage women who are struggling with being the strong Black woman, and feeling that they can never, be anything but that. So my running kind of joke with my clients is even Wonder Woman had to send her cape in for dry cleaning. And on those days, she had to take those days off. She couldn't be a superhero. Like, there's just got to be those moments where we pause and just be. And that's, I think when we can offer our authentic selves to somebody, I think we're doing a lot better than pretending to be something that we're not in a moment, and then teaching people that we may never need support because we're only presenting that strong front. So I really think that we have to think about what we're communicating and maybe redefining some of these concepts that have been actually creating more pain by the areas they've moved into in terms of how we understand them.
Yes, and to add to that Dorothy and Natasha shared, I've noticed that, a lot of the clients that I work with, it's the first time sharing some really dark things that probably have happened within their childhood or, 10 years ago, and they're just now opening up about it. So you can imagine sitting with that pain for that long and not sharing it with someone, and probably people around you notice things but aren't able to really identify what's happening. And I think the video also highlighted that maybe that lack of safety within our community, not being able to express ourselves. I often hear, can't work with each other. And what does that message send to each of us if we can't talk or share, open up to each other? So I think that's something we need to work on in terms of, being vulnerable and open, because if we're Black, we're all dealing with some form of racism, capitalism, all the isms that are happening. So we have some shared experiences in those things.
Thank you so much for sharing, Jelani.
Yeah, what was interesting to me is when you're thinking about categorizations that you hear about Black women, the strong Black woman is basically the one that you hear. And outside of that, the only other categorization that I can think of on a consistent basis that's probably used is loud. So you have space to be a strong Black woman and loud. That's basically it. So it's, again, what society tells you you're supposed to be and how you're supposed to act and stuff like that versus who you actually are as an individual, right? And yes, strength doesn't have to mean like taking everything on and not sharing burdens and that kind of stuff. It can look a little bit different than that. It can be, again, opening up, being vulnerable. There's tremendous strength in being vulnerable. So, I mean, it's really unfortunate. I think just the fact that that stereotype of strong Black woman and really there's nothing else and loud, those are the first two that you typically hear. Yeah, that's a heavy weight to carry. So I know with my Black female clients, again, separating from what society tells you and sort of that front that you have to put up to tell me about you and who you actually are and what actually is going on and what you're actually dealing with and stresses you might be dealing with and fears you might have, concerns you might have, worries you might have, low points that you might have. Like, that's you. So tell me about all of that stuff so that we could get you to being the best version of yourself.
Thank you for sharing. Thanks for those who also shared in the chat. I agree. You know, I was reflecting on him, and we didn't even bring this up, but I think we probably should. As newcomers too, when you come to the country for the first time and what that experience of your mental health is. And I'll share a personal story. My mom, she comes from a line of intergenerational experience and trauma, which we're going to talk about. It's coming up next. And she shared with me that her hair has been falling out over the last couple of years, like 2 years. And I'm like, well, probably stress. So she doesn't, of course she doesn't believe me, I'm her daughter. So she goes to a naturopath, she goes to a different doctor, a dermatologist, and the dermatologist says to her, it's probably stress. And she reflected back, you know, when she came to Canada in 1975, she said for the first 2 years that she was in Canada, her hair was falling out and she had experience of alopecia. And she's like, maybe I was stressed. And I was like, that's the thing about us, our mothers, you know, generations before, is that they just kept going and moving and they didn't check in with themselves to see this stuff is stressful that they're dealing with. Going to a new country, not having your family, your siblings, the people that were close to you, they weren't there anymore. Experiencing anti-Black racism, having to work long hours and for nothing, for pennies, and not even sitting back to say, like, this is having a toll on us. And as Dorothy said, sure, our bodies, it tells us when something is happening, right? Our bodies, I think that was Natasha actually, tells us, our body tells us when it's feeling pain or when it's feeling trauma, and we have to pay attention to our bodies. We have to pay attention to what's happening for us in that moment. Anyone else has any personal thoughts or experiences around this experience of being strong, or even the misconceptions about the Black man and family?
I can just add to what you said too. What came up for me is something that I often bring up in these types of dialogues is, you know, depending on age, but for me, my parents' generation, they came in the 70s, and I still see evidence that they're living in survival mode. They're older, they're retired, they're in the big house that they strive for. They provided the education they wanted so that I could do what I wanted to do, my siblings, etc. But they have never learned to rest because they came in it with such a fight. And I can't even imagine what holding all that stress in your body would do, because I don't think they've ever fully relaxed. They're still in that on guard, ready for whatever's coming at them because of what they dealt with in that transition into Canada. And I think that is something that even as we move into talking about intergenerational trauma, understanding that sometimes we just never learn to relax. And then what are we teaching our children when we think everything's a fight? We know we have lots of fights to face, But what happens when we almost interpret everything as a fight, even when it isn't? And how do we interact with the world around us with that understanding based on past experiences that have brought us to that understanding?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was in a chat too a couple days ago, my in-person event that I did, and someone had shared that as a newcomer, they came to the country and they were constantly striving and fighting. And that clicked for me. I didn't even realize it. As you said, that is that the mentality that we had to work so hard and that we had to continue working. We couldn't even relax. And I find myself doing that sometimes. And I don't know if any of you also have those experiences where you're working these long hours and just keep going and not really taking time to rest or even just feed your soul or your spirit. And we're on the topic of intergenerational experience. So let's talk. Chantal, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that, even moving here and watching my mom come here and, you know, having a great job back in Jamaica and having to kind of start over from the beginning here. So even that's a fight, starting working in, you know, as a PSW, even though she had nothing to do with that, but you had to start somewhere to get back to where she is. So that started over and have to kind of figuring out your title here or how you fit in here also is a challenge.
Absolutely.
Yeah, 100%. And I can also relate to that because I myself, I'm an immigrant, I'm an African immigrant. So not only can I see that presence within my family, I also see that within myself as well, right? And how hard it is for them. Even as when we came to Canada, there were points where we're looking and searching for like resources, mental health services, but there was nothing available. So again, what does that say about accessibility to mental health resources for Black folks, African folks, Caribbean folks, or immigrant folks or newcomers, right? It's almost like if you don't know, you don't know, right? So it's like, again, that means of access there's a lot of limitation barriers to that. And even after you go through you go through that barrier and that limitation and you find a job as well, even if you're looking at that. My mom went through a lot in terms of even a lot of discrimination and a lot of abuse because of her accent, right? So the place that she worked at, a lot of folks were kind of, were really mean to her because of the way she spoke. And I think that how does that also translate to, not to only her, but also her children and even to myself, because I struggle with that as well. Even when I started elementary school and high school, there was a moment where it's like, okay, I had to be really mindful of the way I speak or the way I approach people, because again, I'm so worried as to, okay, am I going to be accepted? We're living in a society that is a Eurocentric community society, right? Like if you don't look a certain way, you don't speak a certain way, you're excluded, there's so much barriers along your way, right? So it's like, as Black folks, not only are we dealing with racism, we're dealing with all the other different layers that come along with that, especially as a newcomer, as an immigrant, right? What does that look like and how does that affect our mental health and our well-being? So again, if we're talking about intergenerational trauma, right? And then another piece that I want to touch on too is Jelani mentioned, being loud as a Black person, a Black Black people, Black women. It's for a lot of African folks, Caribbean folks, the way we express ourselves, the way we show passion is through expression, it's through using our hands, it's through speaking loud, right? So it's like, I have noticed even within sessions when I'm with clients, like they tend to dim their lights, they tend to not speak up, right, in different spaces because they're afraid that they're going to be the angry Black woman, or they're afraid to be like, they're going to be loud, right? So again, how does that, and these stereotype has been around for a very long time. It's not something that's new, right? Oftentimes women experience these things. Oftentimes Black people experience these stereotypes. We're just being ourselves, but then we're being labeled as loud or rude or inappropriate. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, actually, if you don't mind, I actually have a quote that's coming to mind that I really like to even share as well. It's by Audre Lorde, which it says, it says, when we speak, we are afraid our words will not be heard, nor welcome, But when we're silent, we're still afraid. So it is better to speak, remembering we were never meant to survive, right? And then even within therapy, when I work with folks, it's like, I try to encourage the women that I work with that, your voice is important, right? Let them, how can we reclaim our voice back? How can we take our power back because it was taken away from us, right? How can we continue to survive through these limitation and barriers that we're always facing with? Right? So just letting them know that you matter, your voice matters, and my voice matters as well, because not only am I speaking to my clients, I'm also speaking to myself, right? Yeah.
Absolutely, that's a good point. When it comes to, I think it can build in terms of the intergenerational experiences, right? And I know you did a talk with us a couple of weeks ago, Dorothy, and I've often, integrated intergenerational experiences within the work that we do as well. But we know that these experiences that we have gets passed on and transferred to the next generation and the next generation. And even the clients that we connect with or we speak with, they've got their intergenerational experiences that they bring into that counseling setting or that space with you, right? And I guess I will kind of leave it out to whoever wants to respond first. Like, how do you begin to identify intergenerational experience? How do you get people to see what that is and what that looks like in that counseling space?
Well, I really start like my sessions with kind of looking back at past experiences and talking about their own parents' experiences or family experiences. And as you start to hear clients talk, you start to kind of see where things are starting to come from, or without them even noticing that, where they're getting some of the baby behaviors or how they view relationships or interact with people, that it stems from watching their parents or family members deal with things, in terms of, clients seeing abuse within their families and not being given the tools moving forward on how to deal with relationships. They carry that into their own relationships. And it's really until someone notices and really self-aware of what's going on with their family that they're like, okay, I really need to figure out how to break the cycle or not continue some of the things that are going on, which takes a lot of work, a lot of unlearning things that you learned within your family and kind of not following along with family members. And sometimes family members even talk down to you, why are you doing this way? And I've had some clients where they've had to maybe impose some boundaries with families or have had to kind of distance themselves so that they can live in a better space and a healthier mind.
Thank you for sharing key points. Unlearning is really important. Unlearning. Jelani, what did you want to ask?
I was just going to talk about, and it's interesting too, like what Chantel was saying, just talking about how past experiences may shape like present functioning, how you perceive situations, that kind of stuff. Some of that stuff can be helpful in terms of if you're dealing with parent-children relationships, that kind of stuff, right? So I mean, if you're like, an example might be if immigrant parents, again, Black immigrant parents, they've come to this country, they've dealt with racism from whatever culture you want to pick, and then one of their kids shows up with another kid who's a friend from that sort of same culture, right? And they don't even understand what's going on. Sometimes that being able to sort of understand other people's perspectives, that kind of stuff. So it's like, okay, your parents are reacting based on their history, right? And based on what they've experienced and what their reality was, right? Your reality might be a little bit different. But even just being able to acknowledge that and understand that can be helpful both for the parent and for the child as well. So I really think it is important to understand sort of how people's past, how their histories, that kind of stuff can sort of shape how they perceive certain situations right now. So I think that that's a big piece in terms of the intergenerational trauma that we might see and that kind of stuff.
Absolutely, I agree. I think even as, I don't know, maybe this is my bias, but I think it's really important as parents to be aware of that too. And I skipped over the youth piece, but I think, you know, I've often said to young people, you know, I actually don't know what it's like right now to live in your space or to have your experiences, because when I was growing up, it was completely different. First of all, we had no Wi-Fi. There was no such thing as an internet. So that alone has separated me. But even as a parent, I don't want to try to act as though I am an expert in my child's life or experience. I need to hear from them. I need to understand from them so that we're not disconnecting from each other. Absolutely. And I think as you were sharing too, I reflected on something that I did. I don't know if you guys did it, if you're parents, but when I was growing up, I said I didn't want to be like my mom. I didn't want to parent like her. I didn't want to pass on any of those experiences because I thought that the way she did so came from her difficult trauma experiences, right? So I didn't want to do that. But there was so much of myself that I passed on that I got from my mother. And it wasn't just things that I said, it was just how I modeled behavior. My mom worked long hours. She never put herself first. I did the exact same thing. Why is my child doing the exact same thing? Why is she working so hard? Sometimes I'm like, can you just relax? Like, do you know what it's like not to do anything? But it's like it passes down so like innately. And so even just having that knowledge or those conversations are important. Tasha, what did you want to share about intergenerational experiences?
Well, one of the things that comes up a lot in my practice is, you know, people understand, we look back to understand some stuff about ourselves, right? Because sometimes we don't know how we came to a certain mindset without going a little further back. But what I've recognized is sometimes when we see, okay, some of that might have come from my parent, how I was parented, there is a propensity sometimes to blame. And I always say, we're not looking back to blame, we're looking back to understand so that we know what we're releasing, unlearning so we can move forward. And especially because
or
just
letting
like
them off the hook for their
right.
bad behavior, right? Because some people have said that. Are we letting them off the hook? No.
And I appreciate what you said about, you know, your reaction to your mom. So I'm not a parent, so I don't do the, I'm going to parent differently. But I remember seeing some things that I'm like, well, that doesn't work for me, so I'm going to do different. But I think what that highlights is some of the intergenerational trauma becomes we either repeat things because it's learned, or because we decide we don't like it, we become reactionary versus learning what doesn't work and moving through it in a way that's healing. And then we move into things that could be just as harmful. So I'll give a personal example. My mother, love her dearly, she's a crier. And I decided when I was going through my strong Black woman phase that her tears were weakness. And I probably went through a year of my life where even if I wanted to cry, I physically couldn't get water to come out my eye. I was like, water, drop out my eye. Nothing was coming. And it was because I had so internalized tears as a sign of weakness that it shut off my body's mechanism. And I had to heal from that misinterpretation in order to be able to cry again. And it was, so I think we can look at the fact that, just like you said, you can either continue in something, you might see it generation after generation, or we go so far to the other side, but then we can be creating new pains in that too. Because that, what I did wasn't healing. What I did was reactionary, saying, I don't like that, I'm going to do different. But I didn't look at what is going to be the healthy thing for me to do. That was the next step. And so I think we need to understand that some of the ways that what intergenerational trauma looks like. It doesn't always look like a repetition of something that was passed down because we learned it. It could also be our reaction to what we saw that we didn't think was, we didn't want to perpetuate and we didn't want to repeat.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's a chat with Dr. Joy DeGruy. I don't know if you guys have heard of her. She talks about the post-traumatic slave syndrome, and I will absolutely share with everybody here today. But she talks about some of the ways that people lived when they were enslaved has passed down through the generations as maybe a protective mechanism, or maybe a way of supporting their children, because during enslavement, there was things that people had to do to keep their families and themselves safe. And even the stigma around mental health had to be kept safe, right? As Dorothy shared around the saneism, people who were considered to have mental health difficulties when they're being enslaved were considered, to have a diagnosis or something was wrong with them. So I appreciate that for sure. Any other strategies or suggestions around intergenerational trauma? Anything that's come up in your practice that you wanted to share, or even just personal experiences? What about shame? Can I talk about shame? Can we talk about shame in the Black community?
Yeah, definitely lots of that when it comes to seeking out mental health support or just asking for help in general, or doing something that might be perceived as weak, right? So you're going against the grain of what's expected. So I'm not living up to those standards. So definitely shame could be a big piece there, and needs to be deconstructed and addressed.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things that I did a group this weekend, and I talked about when I was growing up, when my mom was growing up, her mother was not really well, and her mental health struggled, and she was in and out of the hospital. And as a result, the family, when they talked about the experience, there was a lot of shame. And so it was kept secret. And so when things happened in the family, everything was kept secret. They didn't want to talk about it. And so what happened was, it was this culture of a family that experienced pain in silos or in secret. And so other traumas started to happen, the sexual abuse trauma or intimate partner violence happened, and nobody talked about it. It was a big secret. And even as people got older, I mean, we've had family members who've dealt with so many difficult things, and they hadn't been able to address it or bring up those issues because of that shame around, having those experiences. And this is something that's gone on we're at generation number 4 with patterns of shame, patterns of, holding on to mental health issues, not talking about things, keeping things hidden under the rug. So it's definitely something that I could say that is in the family and in this certain way. Anyone else thoughts or feelings or their own experiences?
I think it's important to note how shame goes with the stigma, and what it does is it like you talked about in silos, it shuts us in. And if I'm shut into something and I don't have the tools, how am I going to move past it? So I need to be open enough to access outside of me the tools for healing, right? Which could be therapy, it could be, connection in some other sort, but recognizing that shame one often goes with blaming. So it sometimes blames somebody who's not responsible for something that has led to pain in their life. And it really boxes us in, which is so the opposite of the way to go when you want to look at how to promote healing.
Absolutely. Anyone else have any thoughts to share?
Yeah, like what's coming up for me is the, as Natasha is saying, the stigma piece, right? It's like what stays in the house, right? It's like there's not, right? It's like if there's anything happening at home, when we go out in public, you can't see anything. You can't, you can't tell your business out in, in the community or anywhere you are. You have to keep what's happening at home. So definitely that's something that I've experienced as well, right, within my family, and I think within a lot of Black, African, and Caribbean families as well. I think that stigma is still there as well. And as Natasha is saying, it's okay. We need to kind of break out of that and ask and seek help and support when we do need to, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. We had a question in the audience. You raised your hand. I think you should be able to speak.
Yes, I just wanted to share something from my experience with regard to shame. I went through, and still going through, dealing with a mental illness. It started when I was a teenager. And I also come from that. My mom came to Canada when I was 13 and, you know, all that stuff. But what I want to share is that I wasn't able to get real healing until I was able to start to share it, to talk about it. For a long time, I couldn't talk about it because of the shame, right? But then I went to therapy and I realized that there are other people like me who were experiencing mental health illness or struggles. And so as I started to talk about it with people, and it wasn't easy, it was really, really, really hard. But not only did I get better having, you know, shared about my experience with my family, with friends, with peers. I went through some peer support stuff, which I'm still doing, Black mental health peer support. And when I was able, after sharing and helping myself, I was also able to help other people. And that felt good for me. And it helped to give me hope. It helped to give me courage. And just to get out of that whole helpless feeling. And yeah, it has made a huge difference. So I just wanted to put it out there that by talking about it, it not just only helps you, it helps our families too. Because my family, who like cousins and aunts and so forth, they have come to me for help. You know, what did you do about this? How did you help? My son is struggling. What can I do to help him? Can you go to the doctor with me? So yeah, talking about it and getting past that shame is so crucial. It's crucial. Not easy, but it makes a huge difference.
I agree. Thank you so much. And I love peer mentoring. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for sharing. I appreciate it, Sharon.
Okay.
Anyone else want to have a comment about Sharon's comment or even highlight your own experiences?
I just want to say that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Sharon.
You know, yeah, I also share my story at my church, the mental health hospitals, anywhere I can, I share my story.
Oh, thank you. That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. It's so healing that you're saying, right? The more we share, the more we're kind of taking our power back as well, right? From all of those challenges that we may have experienced. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Sharon.
Yeah, it's true. Like taking your power back from that identity, that the stereotypes, discrimination that has been part of the system, right? We're taking that power back. We're redefining ourselves. We're taking management or control. I don't know if control is the best word, but yeah, for sure. Thank you. Let's kind of end in terms of, we'll talk about young people, right? And so what are some experiences that you've noticed that young people have been experiencing? And what are your thoughts about some of the themes or the things to be aware
of? Yes, I'll start just talking about, and I'm guessing it's through, like, it's the result of events like this and celebrities speaking out about mental health and people like Sharon sharing their stories and getting more open about it. And I'm just amazed that the amount of younger people, like between like 16, 21, that kind of stuff, that range, like, or even younger than that, like showing up at the clinic and like ready to talk. about what's going on. And I can think about myself at 15, 16, 17. I could not imagine like going into a therapist's office and just sort of, yeah, I think I'm dealing with this, opening up about it, talking about it. I've been dealing with these symptoms for so long and or this amount of time. And like, yeah, I'm just really amazed by the amount of younger people sort of taking ownership and sort of having a sense of agency over their own mental health and being so proactive and getting help. So that's been just really, really interesting and cool for me to see. They're seeking out their own support. They're not being dragged by their parents and that kind of stuff. And they're being really resourceful. Oh yeah, I researched you on psychology today. I did this. And yeah, like I'm really looking into stuff. And yeah, so it's just been like really, really cool. And there's even some things where I'm like sharing like, okay, well, like maybe you need some grounding techniques. So it's like, oh, well, yeah, I know what those are. I've tried some deep breathing, but it doesn't really work. I might need your help with it. So like just those open conversations, that's been really, really cool. And again, seeing younger people really taking ownership over their mental health and actively seeking out that support. That's just one of the trends that I've noticed. And it's been really, really cool and encouraging to see.
Thank you for sharing.
Wow.
That's amazing. That makes me happy. Chantel.
Yeah, I've also been noticing that, but also noticing that youth are saying that their parents have kind of delayed the process of accessing therapy because of their own stigmas around it. But I've had a youth are really advocating to access it, obviously, because, you know, therapy does cost. So needing that backing from an adult. And also I find that a lot of youth are now even talking more about their experiences on social media, using different platforms to have more conversations about their experiences or what's even going on in media or just with other things that are happening in the world. So I think it's a lot more conversations are happening, which is great.
I agree. Yeah, thank you. Dorothy, do you work with young people? What do you notice?
Yeah, so yes, definitely. I think it's the same trend where it's like there's a lot of curiosity, and even like parents or caregivers will reach out to me because their youth, you know, share to them that they wanted to see therapy. So it's really great to see that, you know, they're really taking that again initiative within their mental health for sure. Definitely also like I'm also noticing too that it's been really tough during the pandemic working with some of our youth, right, experiencing with the pandemic and the uncertainty of the pandemic as well. So not really sure what is coming next, what's happening. So there's a lot of even what I'm noticing, there's a, you know, like I mentioned earlier, increase in anxiety and even also in OCD as well in some of the children that I work with and youth that I work with as well. Yeah, so it's been challenging, you know, trying to do that shift, and some of these symptoms started during the pandemic, right? So for some of the youth that I do kind of work with, but also I am seeing a lot of curiosity in terms of learning about, you know, some of these mental health challenges, right? And they are doing the research to reaching out. So it's really great to hear that. And then another piece too that I'm seeing is that, and I think Chantel or Jelani, sorry, may have mentioned this as well. They're reaching out for communities online in a safe way, right? Especially, let's say, for example, youth that do, you know, identify within the LGBTQ community, right? And let's say, for example, their families are not in acceptance of their identity, right? They do find supportive spaces that they can connect with, and that has been really helpful for some youth that I work with as well.
Thank you so much for sharing. I definitely agree, and I've seen all of those things. I think in the beginning too, just cyber safety was an issue that we actually ended up doing a workshop on that piece because that came up as an issue for sure, but I haven't heard about anything like that in a while. So for me, that's a good thing. And I specialize in working with children and youth. You know, I cognizant of the time as we begin to kind of near to the end of our session today. I thank you for all the many people who joined us, even from the beginning at 6:30, watched all my videos. I'm happy to share those with you all as well as you're closing. And I believe there should be a feedback survey as you leave. But as we kind of close out, and there was a question in the chat that we didn't even get to, but I feel like we can as we begin to close out. The question was, how we can support each other to develop safe spaces to connect with other Black professionals with the layer of tokenism in the workforce. So safe spaces. I also wanted to add on a little bit around the wellness piece, right? How can we develop wellness within our lives to create these safe spaces? So as we, connect to leave, also share your email address and your connection, because people in the chat have asked to connect with you. And I'm also happy to share your information as well. So final question for the night: how do we support each other by creating safe spaces? And what does wellness mean to you? And I'm going to start with Natasha. Sorry, put you on the spot.
Well, I think I'm grateful for the question, because I think it's so important for us as professionals to connect. And I was actually going to be like, can you just make sure that you get all of us who are on the panel to get each other's contact information? Because I think one of the things that we face sometimes in the helping profession is we don't connect and sometimes get that community that we need as well. But I think just looking at how to, foster it, I think being a part of events like this is really helpful. There's something really validating about dialogue that confirms what you're thinking, what you've seen, knowing that you're not the only one who's experienced it and thought it. And then being able to get, information about others, following them on their social media, whatever, finding ways to connect, email addresses, so that you can dialogue with people who are, maybe in the same field as you, or maybe just, similar interests, whatever it might be. In terms of wellness, I would say your approach to wellness, I think, is like having a custom design outfit. You got to check out what works for you, or there's some things that, are often suggested across the board, but you're also going to know specifically as you try different things out, what really works for you. I was shocked to find out that, I moved closer to the lake, and now, not when it's cold, because I'm not fond of being outside in the cold, but when it's warmer, if I'm not walking by the lake twice a week, I'm grouchy, because I just love being by the water and I like being amongst trees. And it was really a change in demographics that taught me how much nature was a part of my own healing. And so just learning what are the specific things for you. For me, if I don't infuse laughter into my healing, it's not going to work, because I need to laugh. I love to laugh. I love to make people laugh, and I love to laugh myself. So I think even here's another place where we can be creative. Ask people what they're doing. Try it for yourself. If it's doesn't work, I always suggest to my clients, have a big toolkit so that you have something else you can reach in and try, because not everything's going to work in every moment.
Thank you so much. I agree. I am not doing well. I like my beaches. That's my safe space. It's been a minute. Yes, I agree. Chantal.
Yeah, I think this question is so important. I even found myself, especially during this pandemic, reaching out to other clinicians especially Black therapists online, social media. It was great to know that there is a community of us out there. While it's small, it's great to know that I'm not the only one out there. So use of social media has been great in that regard. Also, in terms of my own wellness, music has been very therapeutic. It just, put on some soca, even gospel, whatever works for you in that time you need it to just decompress, or have a dance moment to kind of get some movement, especially after sitting down for a lot of time. So that has been very helpful for me, and also really connecting with family and friends when possible.
Thank you. Yeah, our family, so my mom's family got picked on a lot today in terms of my experiences, but we started a Sunday morning check-in at 9 a.m. it was supposed to be a Bible study, but I really don't think we talk about the Bible a lot. It's just we talk about family and we connect, and I get to see my little baby cousins who've been born during the pandemic. And so definitely the connecting piece has been really important. Jelani, thank you so much for coming and being here in this space. What are your thoughts around safe spaces and wellness?
For me, the safe spaces piece is it's really like taking an active approach to creating whatever that space is, because like we can talk about like clinicians not necessarily being able to connect and or not necessarily knowing about each other. Like you said, you know that like I'm in Whitby, so I'm your neighbor basically, and you weren't even necessarily aware of that until this event, right? So it's looking for ways to create a sense of community and actually connection and actively doing it, whether it's Facebook groups, whether it's connecting on other platforms, that kind of stuff. So in terms of the safe spaces, it's really just a matter of trying to foster a sense of community and actually actively making that happen. In terms of what does wellness mean to me, I guess it's probably informed by, like, again, the name of my practice, right, is Thrive CBT. So wellness to me means someone being able to thrive in their life, not just sort of existing. They're living their life on purpose and with intention, and they're actually enjoying their time. So that's what wellness means to me. In terms of my own personal stuff, wellness is being able to connect with family and friends, means being active when I can, playing sports when I can, laughing a lot, and just travel. I'm really missing travel. That's a big one for me as well. I love being able to see new places and experience different cultures, that kind of stuff. So yeah, so those are a few things that are a part of the recipe for me in terms of wellness. But everybody's, like Chantel had said, like Natasha had said, theirs is gonna look different.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jelani, for sharing.
No problem.
Dorothy.
Yes, for me, a safe space, I think that it's okay. I guess what I would say is like, it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to reach out, because I know, even as I think Jelani and Chantel and Natasha have been saying too, within, the therapist group, right, as well, it's okay to reach out. It's okay to connect with others, right? And I know that it can be scary at first, reaching out and connecting to folks, but that's okay. And I think that is like a running theme within our presentation today, that it's okay to reach out for support when it's needed and when it's necessary. And then let's say, for example, you are in an organization, you feel like you don't have as much support for like Black folks within your organization. It's also okay for you to reach out and connect with those folks, and perhaps even creating maybe a group that works for you in a way that is supportive, right? Whatever that is for you, that feels safe within you as well. And I think that it's okay to create those spaces for ourselves when it's needed, because again, our wellness is so important. And then when it comes to what does Black mental wellness mean to me, I think, just to kind of echo with what everyone is saying as well, it's kind of layered for me. I think that Black mental health is, it's again, the individual, right, and the collective experiences that influences the wellness of the community that we have, right? And for me, when I look at wellness, it's also about listening, dancing, singing to Afrobeats, right? Eating plantain, eating fufu, right? African meals, right? It's about connecting with my community, right? And that to me is so liberating. To me, it's so motivating, right? And I think too, wellness within the Black community is about motivating and supporting each other. What does that look like? How do we speak life into each other in a way that is so supportive, right? And I've come to the realization that for me, the more I connect with community, the more I connect with my tribe, right? My support system, the more healing that I feel within myself, right? Having community that is safe is so necessary for healing, for my wholeness, for my well-being, right? And as a social worker and as a therapist, Black mental wellness means practicing within a holistic, anti-racist, Afrocentric, and intersectional framework, right? So, and not only by speaking about it, but also by doing the work, right? And what does that look like? How does that manifest in my day-to-day life, right? The work of advocacy, the work of representation, liberation within our community, right? Black mental health is health, right? As Black people, African people, Caribbean Black people, we deserve joy, we deserve peace, and we deserve ease, right? Our history didn't begin with slavery or enslavement, right? Just so continue to remember that piece, that we do deserve wellness, we do deserve this, right? And just to kind of round it up too, on a systemic level as well, it's like Black mental wellness to me means affordable housing. It means access to affordable mental health services within an Afrocentric lens. It means maybe increase in minimum wages, right? As we all know, the cost of living is increasing, gas prices is going up, right? Groceries is going up, right? So wellness to me is holistic, right? Looking at the individual, community, as well as the system. How is that helping us?
Yeah. Thank you. What a great way to close us off. I thank you and appreciate. I thank you those in the chat who've highlighted your impressions of our chat today. I really appreciate you all coming. I am saddened that we didn't have enough time to talk about all the different topics and the intersections of identities that were addressed as well. Yes, I will definitely connect and reach out. I am all about our grassroots community and supporting our community to become and build our organizations and build our services for our community, because we know our community best. I had a closing song that actually I'm going to steal it from our last session that we did. The facilitator had talked about the redemption song, and she used that as her introduction to our group. So I'm going to use it as our closing for today. As I'm playing the music, I'm encouraging you to dance or just reflect, but also asking our facilitators, panelists today, if you can share your contact information in the chat with our participants. And let's continue to connect with each other and continue to build our community and support each other.